They called him the king of pop. But before the crown, there was a child born under quiet skies, raised in shadows, trained by obsession, and destined to shine. This is the story of Michael Jackson, not the myth, but the boy who carried stars in his heart. Michael Joseph Jackson was born on August 29, 1958 in Gary, Indiana, a small industrial city tucked in the shadows of Chicago's skyline. It was the kind of town where steel mills coughed smoke into the sky and working-class families survived on grit, routine, and quiet sacrifice. Life there was tough, and the air always seemed to carry the scent of metals and dreams. Dreams often deferred but never quite extinguished. Michael was the eighth of 10 children born into the tightly packed, modest home of Joseph and Catherine Jackson. The house was small, but it pulsed with life, laughter, shouting, footsteps, crying, music, and moments of stillness that never lasted long. Privacy was a luxury and silence was a stranger. But inside that chaos, a young boy was listening, watching, and absorbing. Joseph Jackson, Michael's father, was a strict and serious man. By day, he worked long hours as a crane operator in the mill. By night, he became something else, a failed musician determined not to let his own dreams die quietly. He redirected that fire into his sons, forming them into a group, molding them like clay under heat. And it wasn't gentle. Rehearsals began as soon as school bags hit the floor. There was no playtime, no nonsense, just music and expectations. Mistakes were not simply corrected, they were punished. A missed step or a flat note or a lazy gesture all met with sharp words, sometimes harsher hands. Joseph's discipline was cold and rigid, shaped by the same world that had hardened him. He wasn't trying to be cruel, he was trying to make them great. But in doing so, he left bruises, including physical, emotional, and invisible. Catherine, Michael's mother, was the softer voice in the house, calm, devout, and deeply musical in her own quiet way. She sang gospel hymns and played the piano with grace, often while dinner cooked or children ran through the room. It was from her that Michael inherited his tenderness, his spiritual depth, and his quiet longing for peace in a world that rarely gave it. Even as a child, Michael stood out, not just because of his voice, although even then it carried emotion far beyond his years, but because of his presence. His eyes sparkled with something otherworldly. His movements were sharp, yet fluid. He didn't just perform, he became the music. When he sang, time paused. The room, no matter how noisy, quieted. He would often perform in front of the mirror for hours, copying James Brown, Jackie Wilson, or Sammy Davis Jr., studying them not just for their sound, but for their soul. He was a student of greatness, even at the age of 6. And so, in that humble home on Jackson Street, with cracked floors and crowded corners, a star was quietly forming, not overnight, not with fanfare, but through pressure, passion, and the haunting echo of dreams that refused to die. In the early 1960s, before the world knew their name, the Jackson brothers were already making noise, not just in their crowded home in Indiana, but around the neighborhood. What started as rehearsals in their living room, coordinated by Joseph Jackson, with a stern glare and a ready belt, slowly spilled into the world outside. They performed at school talent shows, church events, small town carnivals, and wherever there was crowd willing to listen. Their instruments were hand-me-downs, their costumes mismatched, but their energy was undeniable. And in the middle of it all, barely taller than the mic stand he stood behind, was Michael Jackson. He wasn't the lead at first, just the little brother tagging along. But every time he opened his mouth to sing or broke into a spontaneous spin, the audience took notice. His voice didn't sound like a child's. It sounded like something older, something felt, smooth, soulful, and bursting with raw emotion. It made people stop, stare, and applaud. The Jackson Five was born. Jackie, Tito, Jermaine, Marlon, and Michael. 5 brothers, one sound, pure energy. They practiced endlessly. They fought, they cried, but they never gave up. By the time they started entering local talent competitions, they were winning almost every single one. Then came the breakthrough. In 1969, a video of their performance made its way to Motown Records, the legendary label that had already launched the careers of icons like Diana Ross, Marvin Gaye, and Stevie Wonder. Berry Gordy, Motown's founder and a visionary in his own right, saw the footage. He saw the spark, but more than anything, he saw Michael Jackson. The Jackson 5 were soon flown to Los Angeles, polished, styled, and signed. Under the bright lights of Motown, they transformed from neighborhood performers into national sensations. Their debut single under the label, I Want You Back, exploded onto the airwaves. It didn't just chart, it soared to #1. The world had never seen anything like them. 5 young black boys dancing in sync, dressed in funky bell-bottoms and big afros, electrifying stages with moves that were both playful and precise. Then came the hits, Rapid Fire and Unforgettable, ABC, The Love You Save, I'll Be There. Each one was a classic, each one with Michael Jackson's unmistakable voice ringing through radios across the globe. He wasn't just the lead singer, he was the face, the magic, and the soul of the group. At just 11 years old, Michael was already a star, not in the making, already made. But behind the scenes, the shine came with shadows. The family had fame, but not full creative freedom. Motown tightly controlled their image, their sound, and their direction. Joseph Jackson, always watching over his sons like a hawk, often clashed with Motown executives. Michael, growing more confident and curious, began to feel stifled. He wanted more say in the music, more room to grow. But at Motown, that wasn't allowed, not for kids, not even for geniuses. And then there were cracks at home, money issues, tension between siblings. Jermaine, who had married Berry Gordy's daughter, found himself torn between loyalty to the label and loyalty to his family. By 1975, the rift became too wide to mend. The Jackson 5 left Motown in search of greater artistic control. Jermaine stayed behind, tied to the Gordy family. The others, Michael, Jackie, Tito, Marlon, and now younger brother Randy, rebranded simply as the Jacksons and signed with Epic Records. They were no longer just a boy band. They were young men now, and they wanted to be artists. For Michael, this was more than a label change. It was a quiet rebellion, a shift, a step away from childhood and into the space of vision and independence. But even then, something was already becoming clear. Michael Jackson wasn't going to be just another member of a group. He was beginning to outgrow it. Even while performing with his brothers, Michael dared to dream solo. He loved his family, but inside him stirred something larger, a voice, a vision, a pull towards something more personal and more profound. He wanted to say things in his own way, sing songs that weren't just catchy, but true. In 1971, still just a teenager, Michael stepped forward with his first solo album, Got to Be There. The title track was tender and filled with yearning. It didn't sound like a boy trying to break free. It sounded like a soul already soaring. The album didn't shake the world, but it opened the door. Then came Burn in 1972, a soft ballad about a boy and his rats taken from a film. On paper, it was unusual, but in Michael Jackson's voice, it became hauntingly beautiful. Ben climbed the charts and gave him his first solo #1 hit. The world began to whisper, maybe this boy wasn't just another frontman, maybe he was a force. He continued releasing solo projects throughout the 70s, each one a stepping stone, a quiet evolution. These albums weren't yet explosive, they weren't revolutionary, but they were intentional. Michael Jackson was studying sound, rhythm, performance, and power. Every lyric and melody was a layer in the foundation he was building. On stage with the Jacksons, he was a brother. Off stage in the studio, he was becoming something else entirely, an artist with vision, and still the world had no idea what was coming. But true transformation came in 1979 with Off the Wall under Epic Records, produced by Quincy Jones. Tracks like Don't Stop Till You Get Enough and Rock With You showed he was more than young talent. He was an artist in his own right. The album broke conventions. During this period, Michael even dipped into acting. The Wiz in 1978 alongside Diana Ross, which gave him a glimpse into theatrical life and broadened his sense of performance. Despite his growth, the pressures never left him. Fame's glare sharpened every flaw. The public watched him change, sometimes with awe, sometimes with suspicion. By the early 1980s, Michael was ready not just to enter the spotlight, but to own it. With Thriller 1982, he aimed not just for hits, but for revolution. He teamed with Quincy Jones again. They wanted an album that could cross genres, break boundaries, and redefine pop. The video for Thriller became a short film. Zombies, horror motifs, dance sequences, and narrative arcs. Directed by John Landis, it changed music video forever. His performance at Motown 25, 1983, where he debuted the moonwalk during Billie Jean, is iconic. The audience gasped. The world changed. With Thriller, he became unstoppable. The album shattered records. Racial barriers fell. MTV was forced to embrace black artists. His image became inseparable from his music. Superstardom was no longer a goal. He was living it. Even at his height, Michael's life was a study in contradictions. In his glory, there were fractures forming. He remained tied to his father, the same man who pushed him as a child. The control didn't fade. Reports suggest Michael carried the weight of needing his approval, even in 1985. His appearance began shifting. Rumors of vitiligo, a skin condition, surfaced. Tabloids asked how much has he changed. I scrutinized his face, his eyes, and his body. He was deeply lonely, surrounded by adoration yet distrusting intimacy. The public saw spectacle. He felt the gap between image and self. Yet he didn't stop pushing. Every new album, every new move seemed like a negotiation with darkness, how far it could stretch and how much it could bear. And so, part 1 of Michael Jackson's story ends not with perfection, but with triumph shadowed by tension. He had risen from the cramped rooms of Gary, Indiana to global stages. He wasn't a child star anymore, he was the star. But as spotlights grew, so did scrutiny. The doors he opened for others also let whispers in. The music would echo forever, the questions would follow. Michael Jackson finished Thriller, but the real story was only just beginning.